take 3 questions. I'll write them down and then we'll ask for answers. So your question, please.
Thank you. Martin Lipson from the Welsh Local Government Association. The fact that I'm working in Wales is not connected with this question, though. The Welsh Education Minister said we're not having free schools here, but that's not my question. I'm interested to connect the discussion you've been having with previous discussions about what kinds of schools are we going to have in the future. I wondered if some of those on the panel who are about to have free schools could tell us what they're going to be like. Will they have flexible spaces within them? Are they going to be configured for the 21st century? Or is the Victorian hospital that you're converting in Wandsworth going to suggest that it's a rather Victorian school? How much are you spending to convert buildings like that into schools, and is it the right thing to do you think, to get the kind of environments that you want?
Okay, next question was the lady in the striped top.
Good morning. I'm Lorraine Moss. I work with Tribal Group. We do project management for some free schools, and as an educationalist, I'm involved in some of those projects. It's my understanding that the admissions process is actually exactly the same for free schools as it is for state schools. And I wonder, whilst it's laudable, obviously, for parents to be involved in the education of their children, how particularly Jon and Sobia would feel if, once they've opened their free schools, that their own children are subject to those admissions and don't get into those places.
Good question. And the third one is down at the front here.
I've got a little half one.
Thanks very much.
Oh.
Hannah Jones, Connecting Learning, previously of the National College for School Leadership. We're currently in a crisis with the demographics of our leadership, with the majority of over 40% of school leaders retiring within the next few years, and working very hard on succession planning with different models of leadership, such as federations and others. Leadership has the greatest impact on teaching and learning, second to good teachers. Can you tell me how free schools propose to support their leadership and succession planning and collaboration? Thank you.
Okay. Question at the front.
Kath Inchbold, Oldham's Programme Director, BSF Academies. We've still got a programme in Oldham for 2 BSF schools and 3 academies. It's about transforming learning, but it's also about enhancing community cohesion and desegregating a number of schools in Oldham which are almost wholly segregated on ethnic background. We're likely to face 2 applications for free schools, one for Muslim boys and one for Muslim girls. All 3 political leaders in Oldham are opposed to them. Those applications. They've got together to take that position. So I was just wondering really what the panel's advice to Michael Gove would be if he were to receive such applications.
Great question. Okay, I shall ask the first one. The first one was, Martin, I believe, what kinds of schools will we have in the future through free schools?
That's a very good question. As a parent who's come up a fairly steep learning curve and probably not that far up it thus far, our understanding is that before you can answer that question about whether we'll have a Victorian workhouse in a Victorian hospital, you've got to start from the top down, and you've got to look at what the ethos and the vision for the school is. We're still working through those with ARC. The relevant question there for us, and is a very interesting one to ask oneself, is if you could describe a typical pupil coming out of your school at the end of O-levels or A-levels, GCSEs, sorry, what would that be? If you can answer that question, you can then start looking at ethos, vision, and then the point is, out of vision comes the design model. So we haven't actually got to that point yet. You know, we hope that we've got a restricted site. A point made a minute ago is that a lot of this is to do with great heads, great teaching staff. That's fundamental to the success of a school, along with ethos and vision. We hope we work through those processes that we'll have, you know, a school where kids come out with actually a love of learning as opposed to jumping through hoops and merely passing exams. But I can't answer exactly what the hospital will look like because we're not that far into the process yet, but it's a good point you make.
Fiona, would you like to pick any of those particular questions to answer?
School, so I can't say, but all I can say is that I think I know a lot of schools that want their children to have a love of learning and a balanced curriculum and all those things. I don't think you have to be a free school to do it. And I think the curriculum is very important, actually. And in our area, I hope that rather than, you know, schools going for academy status, we will look more at collaboration, because I happen to think that is the way forward for schools in more straightened times, is to look at sharing resources, possibly sharing teachers, and spreading good practice across the area so schools work together rather than become completely autonomous.
And could I just say, as another interesting one, we are doing that in Wandsworth. We've been around to talk to all of the maintained secondary schools as well. It's difficult, but actually we're forging slowly good relationships with them that will be positive in that fashion, so we work together.
Second question, Indy, what would you think about? What kinds of schools do we have in the future?
It currently feels like, from the debate that I've been hearing and been listening to, is actually the model of schools that is still really looking back into a sort of a pseudo BSF program upwards, and maybe sort of juggling it on a little bit. I think what you're finding in other places, well, I know what you're finding in other places, is quite a different educational framework approaching. And I think, you know, regardless of sort of free schools, which I think is a slightly narrow debate currently, I think there is a bigger question being raised in places around the world. And unless we get our heads out of the UK and a sort of a single government perspective, I think we're going to be in real deep trouble. So I would say we need to start looking abroad more systematically, look at how learning is being taught in places like South Korea. They are really advanced in how they're changing the classroom structures, all the way through to actually collaboration and sharing of knowledge, and how they're all using the internet. The idea of all that stuff is changing quite radically. Places, and also we should learn from places like Atlantic College, which has been very interesting in terms of different modes of education, which are hugely powerful in shifting mindsets. And if you look at places like Chaos Pilots in Denmark, how they've done it, I slightly worry we've become very myopic and slightly focused on a sort of policy down process. I think we need to sort of open our eyes and look back out. And the conversation space is still there. We don't just have to deliver exactly what's out there. And I think we have to become a little bit more visionary about what we believe is the right educational infrastructure, not just respondent to some policy. Yes, the free schools policy will give us that liberation, but I think my worry is that we're becoming too hermetic and sort of just trickling down this process.
Okay, there's a question on admissions to Jon and Sobia. What if your own children don't get into your free school?
I'd be disappointed. Having sort of, I'm self-employed. I've largely taken sort of effectively a 15-month sabbatical to date. It's some parts of it have been great fun, other parts of it less so. What can I say? I mean, that's you've just got to go with that. There's no guarantee that my own little boy will actually get into the school. Absolutely none. And there's actually nothing one can do about that. So. We can't really influence that.
Sobia?
Exactly the same opinion. If that's the way it works out, that's the way it works out, but that's not the sole reason for us opening the school or for us fighting for the school. It's about so much more than our own children. There are so many other children out there that will still be left without places in schools. So yeah, I'm not saying it's not about my child or my children. Yes, it is, but if they don't get in, they don't get in. That doesn't mean we're going to stop the fight. It's what our community needs.
The question from Hannah was, how would free schools support leadership and succession? Is that a question that you've spent a lot of time looking at?
In the context of what? Supporting?
Head teachers.
Head teachers. Well, I mean, in our case, we had a debate back in May. We went to see a lawyer, and he basically said, this was before the election, as things stand, there's probably two models for the free schools. One is, dare I mention it, Toby Young, the sort of the pure parents set up the trust and manage all of that themselves. And then there's sort of the federated model. Now we've chosen, for what we feel are very valid reasons, to go down the federated model. That means we've actually bought in to what ARC do as a multi-academy provider. I take Fiona's point, there will be good academies and bad academies. ARC, we feel, pretty exceptional with the half dozen academies they've got. And in terms of governance, what that means is that they have an umbrella governing body that sits across all of their academies. and we as parents will feed into what they call the local governing body, the LGB. So it's a fairly traditional governing set up in that respect, but the more pure free schools, I don't know about that. We've chosen to go down a federated model.
In our case, we've talked about it again with lawyers, and they've basically said the same. So we've taken the route where ourselves and Circle will sit as a trust above the school and provide support in that manner. There will be a governing body, obviously, but that will be made up of similar to the local authority governing bodies or the local schools governing bodies. But yeah, we will oversee the running of the school as a trust.
Yeah, but I think the analogy that we always used was if we'd been campaigning to say we'll start a local hospital, then as parents we'd know sooner sort of considered operating on the patients, and therefore as parents looking at a school, we think that's best left to the experts, hence why ARC are involved. And also the point about head teachers or leadership is absolutely crucial, that they're the cornerstone of the successful school, and we hope through ARC we'll be able to get an exceptional head teacher.
Dale, in terms of the Every Teacher Matters that you've just published last week, the research has been done into obviously the impacts of teachers, teaching and learning. What's your view on?
Yeah, I mean, there is absolutely no doubt. It is 100% conclusive that the quality of head teacher is going to be the primary driver that affects the quality of the school. The problem with the shortage of head teachers and the difficulties of recruitment and retention are a systemic issue. They're not unique to any one particular school, and they largely arise from the fact that we have conspired to make head teaching one of the most unattractive jobs imaginable. We have made it incredibly difficult to get there. We've constructed a qualification in the NPQH, the National Professional Qualification for Headship, that is inspiring but does not equip head teachers with the skills they actually need to run a school. And then when they do eventually get there, we've taken away their powers to actually do anything. They've got very little say over the way in which they constitute their workforce, for example. They can't choose what they pay their teachers, they can't choose what terms and conditions they employ them under. One advantage that free schools do have is at least they aren't subject to that latter condition. But I think we really need to look at this issue on a national level if we're going to address the problem, really.
So do you think free schools might help to solve the problem or make it worse?
Well, it's true that some of the first generations of academies attracted a lot of so-called superheads. I don't know if that was just sort of because of the challenge or the excitement of the project, or if it was because of the freedoms, maybe a bit of everything. But certainly, I think where there's an exciting project within with a very involved and enthusiastic parental group and governing body behind it, that's obviously going to be an incentive for good heads to want to go there, I hope.
Can I just wait? I mean, one of the things about the academies is they are bidding up head salaries to a point that some other maintained schools can't possibly compete to get the best heads. I noticed on Toby Young's advertisement, which is in the TS this week, along with the advertisement that we're putting in to find a head teacher, it says salary to attract the best. So I'd be quite interested to know where he's getting the money from, not to have a ceiling on his salary. But I think this is really an issue about governance, because it's not only about finding the right head teacher and then supporting them, it's also about challenging somebody who's not doing the job well enough, and that is a very, very important part about governance and succession planning. And I don't think, I mean, with all due respect, I mean, I appreciate the motives behind what you're doing, but being a good governor is a very steep learning curve, and we don't put nearly enough investment and attention in that voluntary big society workforce and the responsibilities they carry to do a good job, and particularly to challenge schools when things aren't going well. And I'm afraid to say you'll get your schools up and running, there'll be academies, free schools, maintained schools, voluntary schools, whatever. Some of them will succeed and some will fail, depending on the leadership. And the way that is handled will come down to the quality of the governing body, and particularly the chair of governors.
Okay, and the final question was around the Muslim boys and girls schools in Oldham. What would be your advice to Michael Gove on receiving those applications? Start with you, Sobia.
Like how you picked me first. In terms of, I mean, the question was asked in terms of what? Sorry, so you the application is to go into Michael for a free school for specifically for single-sex schools. Was that the question?
Faith-based single-sex schools.
Faith-based single-sex schools. I don't think there's any I think the advice to Michael Gove would be to treat them in exactly the same way he would treat any other school application. I don't think there should be any differentiation between a mixed comprehensive or a non-religious comprehensive. I wouldn't know.
It's slightly unfair putting that question straight to you. Does anybody else actually want to answer that question?
What happens when the Scientologists want to open their own school? Should they be allowed to do it? Or the Moonies? I mean, I'm against this. I don't think we should be opening any more single-faith schools. I know why we've got single-faith schools. It's the history of the way education developed in this country. But personally, I would be against single-faith schools, especially if they've got faith-based admissions criteria, because I think it will lead to a lot more segregation, and it won't lead to a more socially cohesive society, which is, I think, what all of us want.
I totally agree. I think there should be no funding for faith-based schools.
Right, we've got time for another round of questions. If you put your hands up if you've got a question. Okay, there's one at the back, one here. Is there a third one? Yeah. One over there. Okay, fantastic. Start at the front.
Hi, I'd just like to come back to the point Fiona made earlier about sharp elbow parents and parents that haven't got much of a voice. You're assuming there that if actually you are proactive in your child's education, you don't care about anybody else's education. And I'd just like to say in Kirklees, we've spent a lot of time, one of the areas that will feed into our school is from one of the most deprived areas in the country. And as a parent group, we have spent a lot of time engaging with them parents, unlike the local authority when they were doing the 3-tier change, that actually felt going in a suit into that school would engage hard-to-reach parents. It didn't, but we actually did because we went on the gate. So I think you're wrong to assume just because we're proactive in our community education, we don't care about anybody else, because we do.
Okay, thank you. Yep. And then back. Anyone else? This might be your last chance.
Hi, my name is Lee Woodcock. I work for Bector, which, despite Indy's assurance earlier on, actually isn't dead yet, but we are dying rapidly as we're one of the first quangos to be closed down. Actually, my question is not about ICT. My question is based on the fact that I'm actually a parent governor of a large secondary school in Leicestershire, which serves quite a rural area. It serves a small town, rural area, and villages surrounding it. If somebody was to start a free school in one of our villages because they decided, unlike myself, that they didn't want their children to go 10 miles on the bus to that school, it could have a devastating effect on the school, because it would be, we're already having to make difficult staffing decisions, deciding whether to drop certain A-level subjects and so on, making staff redundant. So if somebody decided that they were going to start a free school in our catchment area, that could have a detrimental effect on what's at the moment a very successful school. So the question is, how do you prevent people opening free schools from having a detrimental effect on successful local schools? And I think that the situation is completely different in rural areas to the situation that you have in Wandsworth. I do sympathise with the situation in Wandsworth, but I do think it's completely different in rural areas.
Good question. There was... Ty, you're running around. Great job. Was there one somewhere in...
Hi, Honor Wilson-Fletcher. We're actually Academy sponsors. God, there's so many things here to raise. I have enormous sympathy, actually, with a lot of what Fiona had to say, which may sound strange coming from an Academy sponsor, but I think one of the things that the panel has not been able to address and was raised by the National College is that teaching is a profession. It's not independent school by school. So the question is, even if there are superheads being overpaid in academies, they have to come from somewhere, and they have to therefore be supported more broadly. And I think one of the questions we're interested in, we obviously see ourselves as committed and caring academy sponsors, and we're very interested in partnership with as many different kinds of educational institution, local authority, primary, FE, and so on. But of course, there's absolutely no guarantee. I think there's one of the problems in the academy sector and with free schools as well is that freedom and choice are only of any real value if, as a parent, for example, you know what you're choosing between. And the academy movement, I don't think, is a movement at all, because one academy can be so fantastically different from another that from a parental point of view, you have absolutely no idea of what's landing on your doorstep. So I do think that I'm torn between the fact that we can exploit our position to actually exert leverage on our local authority and get them to agree to secure co-location of community services, but I don't think we're actually necessarily that common as academy sponsors in wanting that. So I think the overall question is,
If we have increasing dissemination in independence and freedom, how do all of those different institutions together support the profession as a whole? Because ultimately, great teachers, great school leaders are what make more difference than anything else.
Okay.
Little ripple of applause there.
So the first question was about proactive parents. Are they detrimental to other parents? Do they care about other parents? Does seem to be. I mean, I've certainly had that as a parent involved in setting up a free school. Is that something that people have come up against? The second one was about how do you prevent new free schools from having a detrimental effect on other local schools that may be successful at the moment? And the third one was about the impact of academies and parents not knowing what they're choosing between. Does the free schools debate help with any of those questions, I suppose, or the free school sort of seems like a...
Well, I think one of the things that worries me is about where are the incentives to collaborate in this system that we're creating. I think the last Labour government did try and bring the academies more within a fold where collaboration was part of the process. But I can see that all being unpicked because a lot of the things you've raised actually do come from people learning from each other, working closely together. If things are going badly, you go somewhere else and they can help out with ideas or they can model good practice and all those things we know that do help to make schools better. If you've just got a lot of autonomous institutions chasing a smaller and smaller pot of money, I think that sort of collaboration will be threatened. And to the lady over here, the Chair of Governors, I mean, I think this is our central concern about free schools. If we need more school places in a given area, of course everybody admits that has to happen, but it must happen across a locally agreed framework where everybody's views are taken into account. You see, because I get quite a lot of emails from other parents in your area in Kirklees who are not happy about your school and are very worried about how it's going to affect their schools. Now, you know, I think everybody in a given area should have a say. We may not have come up with an outcome that everybody is happy with or is fair to everybody, but there has to be some locally accountable process for how funds are spent to create an education system across a given area. And again, I think more autonomy, more fragmentation poses a real threat to that being the future of our school system, and that's what worries me.
Okay, I'm getting a from Ty at the back. I'm just going to ask everyone for one last comment to sum up. Start with you.
Yeah, I mean, just on this point, I mean, if you're, obviously I don't know the specifics of your area, but if you're in an area where, you know, you do not have demand exceeding supply, and so it isn't a case of just needing to create additional places, then, you know, I think you have to ask the question, why is this free school being set up? And the answer presumably is either because what your school is offering is not good enough, or because it's not the same as what the parents who want to set up that free school want. Now, this is the nature of competition. Now, that may potentially have a detrimental effect on your school, but the whole point is that then has to create the incentive for you to respond to that parental demand and find out why is it those parents want something else. Is that something that you can actually change your school to provide for them? Can you eliminate the need or the desire for them to go elsewhere? If not, and if it ends up just being reducible to a case of, you know, in the simplest case, two groups of parents wanting very different types of things for their kids, then I think that's a good thing. That's something we've got to encourage. That might mean that your school offering your particular type of education has to shrink. Well, if that's it, then so be it. But this is the nature of allowing parents to choose the education that they want for their children.
Sobia, final point?
I really do. I do feel that free schools are the way forward. We within BBG, we do seek to work with all the other local schools in the area, so I don't think that it's going to be us in isolation and we'll sort of cut ourselves off from all the other schools in the area. We do want to promote community cohesion within the area. We're seeking to work with the schools 2 or 3 miles away, which are predominantly Asian. So yes, we're very, very aware of all the issues surrounding free schools, and we'll do everything that we can to make it right.
Indy, final thoughts?
I think, in terms of final thoughts, I'd say the free schools conversation sits in a debate which is rising around the growth of the civic economy and the rise of the civic economy more largely, otherwise known as big society and various other conversations. And I think we have to I think there's a recognition, certainly, that there's a general trend towards a different type of civic entrepreneurship. and that's going to call upon a different type of behaviour. And I think there's going to be certain issues and responsibilities that we all as citizens going to have to start to take part of. And I'm actually quite hopeful of the appropriateness of that innovation, the appropriateness of the school you're proposing, rather than seeing it as a competition story. I think what will hopefully be given is more appropriate innovation in the right context. So I'm actually hopeful this can be actually part of a new future.
Fiona.
Well, locally accountable schools, fair admissions, no selection, and beware of talking about analogies between schools and things like shops, because children aren't tins of baked beans or loaves of bread. And if a shop fails, nobody suffers very much, really, apart from the owner of that shop. But if a school fails, it has profound consequences for the children in it. And John, finally.
Yeah, I never thought I'd hear myself saying that we have a Conservative Tory leader who's a cross between Hugo Chavez and Joe Strummer. But you kind of have a guy here who's saying power to the people, big society, and just go out and do it for yourself. And in that respect, policy into practice, from our campaign in Wandsworth, it's more practice into policy, because we started this before we'd heard about free schools, but certainly the opportunities we have under the free school policy enables us to deliver a much needed school in a part of London which is perhaps unique, as opposed to sort of more rural areas where there's a rising birth rate, there's a crushing need for extra places, and we hope through the free school policy, notwithstanding some concerns because it's still very new and there aren't any guarantees, but we hope that free school policy will enable us to give our local kids a great education.
Great, I think that's enough from us. We can continue the debates over lunch, but thank you very much to the panellists.